What's up guys, I'm Sean. Today we're going to talk about brakes, specifically brake pad knockback. Pad knockback doesn't really happen on the factory brake systems with the single piston calipers. It's more common on aftermarket big brake kits and factory installed big brake kits with multiple pistons. If you go to StopTech's website, they actually have a really good article about pad knockback on a race car. Pad knockback is actually quite common on BMWs with the McPherson style strut. So today I'm going to talk about what is pad knockback, how to address it, and how to minimize it on track. I'm going to remove this bridge bar so you'll see the brake pads and rotor clearly. So let me explain what pad knockback is. If you had thick pads here, the pistons will be further into the caliper. When you step on the brake, the piston will automatically push the pads into the rotor and you'll get instant brake pressure. But as your brake pads run thin, like you see here, it's really thin, and look at the distance now from the pistons to the brake pad. I could basically stick my finger in here. So what happens is when you're on track, as you're pulling G's around the turns, these pistons slowly get knocked back into the caliper, which is why they call it pad knockback. The brake pads are actually knocking the pistons back into the caliper just by a few millimeters. So what happens is now when you're on the track, when you step on the brakes, instead of being that instant pressure into the rotor, now you have a slight delay. It might be 1 or 2 millimeter gap or maybe more. And that slight delay causes you to miss your braking zone. So there are a few things you could do to solve this. One is a hardware change. This big brake kit has what they call conical washers between the rotor hat and the rotor. So what happens is the conical washer allows the system to kind of flex and expand with heat, but because it slightly flexes, it knocks the piston back into the caliper. So what you can do is you can change the washer from a conical washer to a flat washer, and that will prevent it from quote-unquote flexing. The downside is it'll make a little bit more noise. The other thing you can do is they have these springs. It's called anti-knockback springs, but basically you put a really small, 4, 5, 6 pound spring behind the pistons, and then the spring will kind of push the pistons closer to the pads. Here are my old PFC brake pads. But it's actually pretty interesting is look at this pad. This one is so thin, but it also has a hole in it, which is crazy. So these pads are done, and I'm going to be installing some new pads. One thing you can do to minimize pad knockback is to refresh the hardware you have here. New ball joints, new control arms, new bushings, new suspension, new wheel bearings. By minimizing any kind of movement or flex, it minimizes the ability for the rotor to knock back the pistons. Here's a driving technique that I just learned, and it actually solved my pad knockback issues on track. On the straight while I'm wide open throttle, I use my left foot and tap the brake right before a major braking zone before I clutch and heel toe rev match downshift. By lightly tapping the brake with your left foot before a major braking zone, you allow the pistons to seat to the brake pad and the rotor, which makes the brakes really consistent. Now it takes a while to get used to the sensitivity, so what I recommend is practice left foot braking on the streets if you have an automatic to practice on. If you don't, if you have a manual when you're driving on the street, start just tapping the brake with your left foot lightly and get used to that sensitivity. It's an advanced driving technique, but if you practice it on the streets, you can master it on the track. Some people mistake pad knockback for brake fade. When you're on track, you step on the brakes. 1 minute it works perfectly fine. The next minute, there are no brakes. So if you have a upgraded big brake kit, upgraded race fluid, and upgraded race pads, and you're still dealing with braking issues on track, most likely it's pad knockback and not brake fade. If you guys have any questions or comments, let me know. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching.